No Rest for the Wicked is a game like Diablo, Dark Souls, and Animal Crossing having a messed up baby together. Combining ARPG elements with the slower, methodical, stamina management formula associated with the FromSoft games, No Rest for the Wicked is a truly ambitious project. It's a game from Moon Studios, most well known for their outstanding work on the Ori games, and ever since the trailers and the information on the game's development roadmap were released, I've begun looking forward to the game's release myself. My girlfriend was looking forward to this game so much that she'd wake up and message me basically counting down the days till the game's release on early access. Let's talk about it now that the game's out and I've sunk quite a few hours in. You know the meme of Ubisoft basically showing off mind-blowingly good game trailers and claim that they are all in-engine footage, which just eventually turns out to be faked for marketing? Well, I'm happy to share that the cutscenes in this game are actually generated in-engine and are stunningly beautiful in their composition and acting. What's even more impressive is that when the cutscenes end, the game itself does look that gorgeous. I knew that the games would be visually appealing knowing Moon Studios' amazing work on the Ori games, but looking at the games right now, the footage that you can see on screen simply doesn't do the game justice in terms of showcasing how good it looks. Everything from the seamless changing of environment design from one zone to the next, the way the rain dances across the screen, and the reflections of the sun and moon changing the way an entire scene looks is just awesome. Simply put, the game's a visual masterpiece, and I'm very happy to share with you that it's one of the most beautiful games that I've played in a very long time. Very rarely do you find a game nowadays that just makes you stop in your tracks, stop what you're doing and go, man, what a beautiful view. A+ for visuals, no complaints here. Next, let's talk a bit about the story. It's a little early to comment on the quality of the story right now, considering I only have 12.5 hours in the game, but I am pretty impressed by the production quality of everything presented to me so far. The voice acting, the quality of the cutscenes, and the political intrigue that was shown in my first few hours of play were all generally memorable, and I think the biggest indicator of this would be that I can actually remember all the characters and the major NPCs that I've talked to so far, which is a very good sign. I particularly enjoyed that all the characters you interact with are voice acted, and that the people in the towns respond to your character as you run past them or when you help them rebuild their homes and shops. This helps to add the sense of immersion and progression as you feel that the game world is actually responding to your decisions and actions. Of course, my opinion on this subject may change as more and more of the story gets released and I play through it, but for now I consider myself somewhat invested in the game's story, largely due to the strength of the voice acting, cutscenes and production quality. From my perspective, no major complaints here and we'll have to see how the story progresses over time. The next thing which I wanted to talk about is the combat and progression system of the game, which I think was done generally well. Considering that No Rest for the Wicked is a top-down style game reminiscent of ARPGs like Diablo and Path of Exile, I basically defaulted to spamming all of my buttons, dodge rolls, attacks and spells all at once. I'm not shying away from the fact that this basically got me killed numerous times in the early game, where I just run out of stamina and get demolished in one combo by a regular enemy. The combat system in this game is a combination of what I talked about earlier in the sense of the ARPG systems, along with the FromSoft formula of slower, more methodical combat as a result of stamina management. This makes combat feel more weighty and impactful as each attack can deal serious damage to both you or your opponent if it connects. This, of course, isn't all of the mechanics carried over from the FromSoft games, as the game also uses a weight system where lighter characters can perform a longer, faster dodge, while slower characters were basically fat roll. The game also adopts a poise system where heavier armors allow you to continue attacking more easily without getting interrupted by an opponent's attack, but of course this comes at a trade-off of not being able to do quick rolls due to the increased encumbrance and equip load. Combining the ARPG style with FromSoft combat mechanics took me a while to get used to, especially since the formula was so different from anything I've played up till this point. But after around 6 to 7 hours of play, I finally got the hang of it and started treating the game's combat more like Dark Souls and Elden Ring, waiting for an opponent to strike, then dodging, blocking or parrying, and then retaliating with my own combos and attacks. This combines with the game's interesting rune and focus system where different weapons can be slotted with different skill gems which can provide an edge in battle. Let me explain a little bit more. When you attack an enemy, you gain focus points, which is shown in the orange bar at the top left of your screen. The focus bar can then be used to unleash special attacks using the runes that you have slotted onto your weapon. For example, my current weapon comes with 2 slots, one of which was filled with the regular spin special attack, while the other was left empty for me to customize. Since I was playing a melee build, I generally lacked ranged options to deal with mobile enemies. This is the reason why I decided to slot in the fire throw attack, which gave me a means of dealing with these enemies. Both of these skills use focus and can help me turn the tide of combat when used at the right time, such as unleashing a burst of damage at close range with my spin, or finishing off an enemy at range with the fire throw. This system is unique, and I enjoy that it allows me to craft and produce builds which align with my playstyle and preferences. This is taken the step further when I compared my build with that of my girlfriend's, who uses a staff. Her build revolves around using low damage melee attacks to generate lots of focus points and unleash powerful spells using those focus points. Making use of all these systems and wrapping my head around the slower, more methodical combat system finally clicked, and I started gaining levels and defeating more and more enemies. Speaking of levels, the leveling system in the game is similar to that of the FromSoft games, where you have a standard stat spread. The major difference here is that every level up you get in No Rest for the Wicked gives you 3 trait points per level, as opposed to using currency for level ups like in Dark Souls or Elden Ring. With all that being the case, I feel that overall combat feels great, and I really enjoy the flexibility of build crafting in the game, which makes it even more enjoyable and adaptable to every player's preferences. Solid stuff all around. I genuinely enjoyed the combat in this game. I love that the game and the devs are being so transparent, upfront, and justified with the way that their game is being marketed and priced. They were clear from the get-go that this game is not yet finished, and that there are many major content updates such as the broadened single-player features like farming and multiplayer co-op features coming just around the corner. On top of this, they also stressed that the game still needed polish and a lot of fixes, which would be facilitated through Steam's early access program and the collection of feedback there. They decided to price the game at around $30 to $40 and even adopted regional pricing models so that the game would be more accessible to those around the world. I really respect this decision, as it goes against the new normal in modern gaming, where publishers and studios now try to sell you a product at full price, sometimes even more, for a product that's not even complete or functional on launch. Big ups for this, shout out to the devs and publishers. The final thing which I wanted to talk about in this quick first impressions video which I enjoyed is the enemy variety. I know that this is not major, but I appreciate that the game has a wide variety of enemies for you to fight. In just the starting area, you will fight all kinds of enemies, ranging from the regular grunts to heavy enemies with large weapons to fat hulking elites to firebomb throwing alchemists. What's even crazier is the fact that the enemy types and positions are randomized on each respawn. Meaning that if you cleared out a location before and return to it afterwards for looting, the enemies within it may be different from your last visit, forcing you to always be on your toes all the time. This is very refreshing, as each enemy type is countered by a specific style of play, be it rushing them down with a flurry of attacks or waiting for their combos to complete and retaliating during their recovery window. There are even enemies that will parry your attacks, which can throw you off if you are fighting multiple enemies at the same time. This variety gets even more insane as you progress into the different later stages of the game, but I won't show anything here so you can go experience it all for yourself. With such a diverse roster of enemies to fight, every combat encounter offers a different experience and helps shake off the feeling of repetitiveness in RPG games as you progress to a higher and higher level. Speaking of enemy variety, something which I've noticed is that after you've cleared an area and come back to it at a higher level with more gear, the enemies which respawn in that area will also change and become higher level, more challenging versions of the enemies that you faced originally. For example, the first time I passed through the ruined fort, it was filled with basic sword wielding grunts and maybe a crossbowman here and there. After packing on some levels and upgrading my equipment, I come back and see that the enemies are now heavies with two-handed axes or even special knight variant enemies with lances and tower shields. I love this system because it helps you feel that even though you are getting stronger as a player, the world keeps pace with you and leaves you wondering what enemy is gonna be around every corner. Now let's move on to the not so pretty parts about this game. And the first thing up on my list is the performance. I have a pretty decent rig running a 7900 XTX, 64GB of DDR5 and a Ryzen 7600 as well. Even then, the game does stutter and freeze quite a fair bit, especially when going from one zone to another. This is particularly noticeable during rain, where I notice frame drops of around 10 to 20 FPS when I'm out in the world. This becomes a lot more pronounced in terms of performance issues when you are entering and exiting the main hub town of Sacrament. As I walk through the gates, I will see my FPS drop from 120 plus on the balanced preset all the way to 50 or 60. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that this is unplayable by any means, it's just a bit jarring every time you go in and out of the city, which is going to be pretty common since that's where all of the quests and the vendors are. Combat is a mixed bag too, as sometimes FPS drops whenever there are multiple enemies on screen doing special attacks. For me, this was most noticeable when the game was rendering a lot of background visuals as well, or when objects break as a result of attacks. I admit that this can be a little annoying as it can completely screw up the rhythm of combat, but in my experience it only happened a handful of times for it to be an annoyance rather than a genuine problem. That being said, if performance is a big turn off for you, I would suggest waiting till this game gets patched a little more before you decide to make a purchase. Next on the list of not so great things is the bugginess. As you know, being an early access title, the game is going to be pretty buggy. For me, this manifested in three key ways. First, the animations for actions and certain interactions did break, where my character would just stare at a dirt pile which he was supposed to be shoveling, as opposed to the animation running as per normal. I'm not really sure what's the trigger for this, but this is just one of those bugs that's really just funny and not game ruining in the slightest. The second is that controls can be a bit inconsistent at times, particularly during climbing or traversing over thin objects like tree trunks. I find that the movement is a little sticky, where shifting my controller in a certain direction gets the character to move in a completely different direction or they don't move at all. This is especially apparent during the climbing of ladders, vines or other traversable objects. Lastly, the game would also crash sometimes when I was entering buildings within Sacrament, which is the main hub town. To me, this happened like twice within my 12 hours of play. The game does have some stability issues which need to be ironed out. That being said, I really do hope that this can come sooner rather than later, because the crashes in particular can be pretty immersion breaking and detract from an overall pretty positive experience. I trust that Moon Studios is already working on this, so let's just see how things pan out later on with the updates. The last thing which I wanted to talk about in terms of the parts which I didn't really like about the game was the fact that loot and boss loot in particular is randomly generated. Disclaimer, again, this is my personal opinion, but I feel that the loot system in the game, especially when it comes to bosses, is extremely frustrating. Loot generation in this game is completely random, meaning every chest, every enemy drop, and every item in the world that you pick up is randomly generated. The goal of this was that so every player will have a different experience, which honestly I felt was something cool. However, where this crosses the line for me personally is that this RNG system also applies to boss drops. This means that if you kill a boss in your game and they don't drop their weapon, you are out of luck and can basically never obtain that weapon again unless someone trades it to you when multiplayer comes out or you restart your realm. This essentially means that you can't access some of the unique weapons in the game if you are too unlucky to have it drop. In my game, I've killed multiple bosses and mini-bosses and had the misfortune of not having a single unique item of theirs drop for me to use. This honestly really sucks, as I believe that being able to obtain boss weapons is a reward for overcoming a challenge, and in this game, that reward is unfortunately left up to chance. I'm just a little frustrated that I can't use the cool weapons that the bosses use, and I'm helpless to change things until multiplayer comes out, or I give up and create a whole new realm and start over. Again, this is a personal gripe, I know, but I just wanted to get this out there so everyone knows what you're getting into if you decide to put down money and play the game. With all that out of the way, I think, as I mentioned, take everything which I say here with a pinch of salt, because it is just first impressions that the game is still in early access. Overall, I'd say that I had a positive experience during my time with the game so far. That being said, I also acknowledge that there are some very real problems with it in its current state. In my eyes, it's a beautiful, ambitious game that needs a lot more polish and fixes before I'd consider it finished. But if they do fix the issues which I've raised, I'll happily give this game a glowing review. As of right now, I'd suggest waiting until the game gets patched a little more before considering buying the game. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll get back to grinding for resources and upgrading my little town. Thanks so much for watching, and if you like what you see, please subscribe. Thank you.